With your host, Andrew Donaldson. This is Heard Tell.
Heard Tell Show. It's a Thursday, folks. We're getting down to the nitty-gritty of the week. I'm Andrew Donaldson. Thank you so much for joining us today for Heard Tell with the most precious thing you have, your time. Couple different stories we're going to touch into. We're going to update the Mark Meadows situation. He got himself in a little trouble over voter registration, voter fraud. The voting system has struck back, if you will. Also, an absolute bonkers story involving the Secret Service getting duped. Two people posing as federal agents was able to get as close as being on a detail with the First Lady. Shocking story of government incompetence and corruption. We're going to touch on that. We'll end the program on a high note like we always do. We're going to go over to England, a charity that works with ex-criminals once they get out of prison, helping them put their lives back together by getting them jobs. We'll talk about that. Great guest today. She's back. Brooke Medina. She promised she'd come back when the North Carolina Senate race Civitas poll would come out. It's out. It's making national headlines because of the information they're in. We're going to talk to her about it. Brooke Medina, the comms vice president for the John Locke Foundation. They have the Civitas poll out. Going to talk a little U.S. Senate race. Going to talk about some other North Carolina folks that are on national news. Madison Cawthorn, Mark Meadows. We just see that's twice we've had to talk about him. That means there's no good afoot, as there usually is with that particular individual. Brooke Medina as our guest today. But first, there is some wanton corruption that has been found in our political system. This is outrageous. Lieutenant Governor Benjamin resigns following campaign finance indictment. Brian A. Benjamin, New York's second in command to Governor Katie Hochul, was charged with bribery, fraud, and falsification of record. Well, this sounds bad. Let's dig into this a little bit. Governor Hochul, who selected Benjamin to be her lieutenant governor less than a year ago, announced that he was stepping down immediately, quote, while the legal process plays out. Now, these allegations go back to when he was a state senator, not when he was the lieutenant governor. The 5-count indictment, this is from the New York Times, charging Mr. Benjamin, said that while he was a state senator, he conspired to direct $50,000 in state funds to the Harlem real estate developers charity. In exchange, the developer garnered thousands of dollars in illegal contributions to Mr. Benjamin's 2020 state Senate campaign and his unsuccessful 2021 bid for New York City comptroller. Mr. Benjamin, who pled not guilty on Tuesday, was also accused of offering to help the developer, Gerald Migdal, obtain a zoning variance if he made a $15,000 donation to a separate fund of the state Senate Democrats. Oh, good old-fashioned New York City pay-for-play for a zoning variance. That's very original. We have a former president who was a master at that sort of thing, by the way. The developer was arrested on federal charges in November and pled not guilty at the time. This is a simple story of corruption, Damian Williams, the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, said at a news conference before Mr. Benjamin's resignation. Taxpayer money for campaign contributions, a quid pro quo, this for that. That's bribery, plain and simple. The resignation of Mr. Benjamin could prove a serious political liability to Ms. Hochul, who took office last year after Governor Andrew Cuomo resigned in disgrace. Boy, there's a bunch of corruption up in the Empire State. Who would have thunk it? Although she has not implicated any of the allegations against Mr. Benjamin, this indictment of her handpicked number 2 threatens to undercut Ms. Hochul's vow to turn the page on an era scandal in Albany. Man, that is a whole bunch of words before we got to his political party. He's a Democrat. Of course, it's New York State, so you kind of knew that. It's amazing they didn't mention one time in there that he's a Democrat. Boy, these Democrats are just running ragged with the corruption. The big media is covering their tracks. Nobody is holding these people accountable. The Democratic parties are all corrupt. It's amazing. It's terrible. What? Wait a minute. Hold on a second. What do we got here? South Dakota, reading from the AP News. House on Tuesday impeached State Attorney General Jason Ravnsborg over a 2020 car crash in which he killed a pedestrian, but initially said he might have struck a deer or another large animal. Ravnsborg, a Republican, is the first official to be impeached in South Dakota history. He will at least temporarily be removed from office pending the historic Senate trial, where it takes a 2/3 majority to convict on impeachment charges. The Senate must wait at least 20 days to hold a trial, but has yet to set a date. Ravnsborg pleaded no contest last year to a pair of traffic misdemeanors in the crash, including making an illegal lane change. He has cast Joseph Bauerverse, that's the victim's death, a tragic incident. In narrowly voting to impeach the state's top prosecutor, the Republican-controlled House charged Ravensburg with committing crimes that caused someone's death, making, quote, numerous misrepresentation to law enforcement after the crash and using his office to navigate the criminal investigation. As Senate conviction would mean Ravensburg would be barred from holding any state office in the future. When we're dealing with life of one of your citizens, I think that weighs heavily on everyone, said Republican Representative Will Mortensen, who introduced the articles of impeachment. Ravensburg said in a statement he's looking forward to the Senate trial where I believe I will be vindicated. Meanwhile, Team Borman, the Attorney General's chief of staff, said his staff would professionally dedicate ourselves to their work while Ravensburg is forced to take leave. The Highway Patrol concluded that Ravensburg car had crossed completely onto the highway before hitting Bover, and criminal investigators said later they didn't believe someone of Ravensburg's statements. The House rejected the recommendation of a GOP-backed majority report for a special investigatory committee, which argued that anything wrong he did was not part of his official duties in office. Oh, to hell with that. I hate that line. We'll talk about that in a second. But even Republican lawmakers who argued his actions did not meet constitutional grounds for impeachment said Ravensburg should resign. Moral of the story, I don't care if you're a Republican or a Democrat. If you're a corrupt person in office, if you're not a functional adult, if you do something criminal like kill someone and then lie about it and use your office to try to cover it up, or get caught doing bribery, or like Andrew Cuomo, get caught mistreating and abusing women and then using your brother at CNN to try to cover it all up. I don't care what your political party is. You don't belong in office. You ought to be run out. You ought to be publicly shamed until you repent for your misdeeds, and then you should never be allowed elected office again. This stuff shouldn't be hard, but far too many people want to rah-rah their own teams. I've told you this before. My first election was the 98 midterms. That's the Clinton impeachment midterm, by the way. And that's when we had President Clinton lying about his affairs and all that. He got impeached for it. And we also had to go through two different Republican speakers of the House for their own lying and their own misdeeds just to get the impeachment forward. Turtles all the way down, folks. If they're corrupt, get them out of there. Don't go rah-rah on your team jersey over anybody who's corrupt. You're not going to get good stuff from them, and they're just going to drag you down with them. So the Democrats in New York State, the Republicans in South Dakota, good on you. Get rid of the riffraff, even if you had to get drug kicking and screaming politically to do so. I'm glad, at least in this case, they're doing the right thing and prosecuting the baddies. We need to do more of that. We need to call the herd a lot more when it comes to our elected officials. The only way they will ever behave themselves is if they are in fear of their office from us, the electorate. I think Congress should kick about 4 or 5 members of Congress out right now, today, for being unfit. And it might even keep some of the rest of that hot mess a little bit more honest when it comes to our time, our money, and our country. When it comes to morality, we've been debating this for a couple of years about how, well, they don't have to be a moral person. They just have to do the job. How are they going to do that? Push comes to shove, the immorality is going to win out. I hate that line in this piece. I'm going to read it again. The House rejected the recommendations. This is from the AP story out of South Dakota. I'm reading it again on purpose. Listen. The House rejected the recommendation of a GOP-backed majority report for a special investigatory committee, which argued that anything wrong he did was not part of his official duties, quote, in office. No, there's no such thing. If you kill a guy and you're holding an office, you shouldn't get to hold that office anymore. It doesn't matter that you did it on your off time. You still did it. You're unfit for office. You can't lead citizens when you accidentally or otherwise kill one and then turn around and lie about it and use that same system of government to try to cover it up. You can't be in the state of New York and try to uphold the law, which was your duty, which was your sworn duty when you're running around taking bribes and doing rot level corruption. Now, we're all adults. We understand there's corruption in politics of various degrees all the time. Fine. If you want to go down the immoral route, I'll put it to you this way. If you're not good enough to do base level political corruptions without getting caught, you're not good enough to do the job in the first place. So if the moral argument doesn't satisfy you, maybe the immoral argument. If you're incompetent at being corrupt, you're not going to get anything done as an elected official anyway. Run them off for that reason. Either which way, back to the main point, keep the main thing the main thing. Wrongdoers, Unworthy schemers, FDR called them in his fireside speech about D-Day. I like that terminology. Bad people, non-functioning adults, folks that you wouldn't let anywhere near your kids, your family, or your workplace, or your home. Don't let them in elected office. And if they're in elected office, get them out of there, either electorally, judicially, or legislative processes like impeachment. Enough's enough. And unless we do the house cleaning, the cleaning will never get done. It's up to you. What kind of government do you want? Because it represents you. You want all that corruption? Just stay quiet about it. You want to do something about it? Let's start making some noise. More Heard Tell right after this. Here is an absolute bonkers story as we continue on Heard Tell. I'm Andrew Donaldson. Thank you for staying with us. Did you hear about this? You might have heard tell. The case of duped Secret Service agents called an alarming agency breach. Long story short, Secret Service leaders are having to do some walk back now because what happened, they were allegedly hoodwinked by two men impersonating federal agents and plying them with gifts, telling them congressional committees and allies that the severity of the breach has been overblown by prosecutors and the media, according to people familiar with the conversations. We're going to work off the Washington Post article here. But one of these agents assisted to protect First Lady Jill Biden. That's pretty deep into the process here if they faked their way that far. The case, this is from the Washington Post, is the latest in a string of embarrassing security breaches and incidents of misconduct involving the Secret Service over the past decade. The scandals have included agents getting drunk and hiring prostitutes on a trip to Cartagena, Colombia, in 2012, an incident in 2014 when a wounded veteran was able to jump the White House fence and get past dozens of armed Secret Service officers and into the executive mansion, and an officer investigated last year after posting comments on Facebook in which she accused lawmakers who formalized President Biden's win of treason. Sounds like a good group of folks that we probably should be stopping, and the Secret Service should have much better success at stopping. Continuing. According to federal prosecutors, Arian Terazadi, have no idea how to pronounce his name, 40, and Haider Ali, 35, posed as Department of Homeland Security agents and offered two agents and two officers with the Secret Service, as well as one DHS officer, a string of gifts beginning at least in February 2021, possibly as early as February of 2020. So this has been going on almost 2 years now. The gifts that prosecutors say were accepted included iPhones, surveillance systems, a drone, a flat screen TV, a case for storing an assault rifle, a generator, law enforcement paraphernalia, and the use of what Terazadi characterized as a government vehicle. The FBI also said the two Secret Service uniformed officers accepted free $40,000 a year rental apartments from Terazadi, I'm probably still saying it wrong, for about a year in the Crossing, a luxury Navy Yard apartment complex where the two suspects are alleged to have had unusual control over several apartments and where they had set up surveillance. One of the officers told investigation that Terazadi claimed DHS had approved extra rooms as part of his operation that the officer could live in for free. The other said Terazadi claimed another federal law enforcement officer was living rent-free. Boy, there's a whole lot of wrong here. The article goes on. The nut of it down at the bottom is this. Some former Secret Service agents say the incident shows how easily someone could target agency staffers to obtain highly classified information about both the president's movement and other national security matters. They say the agency needs to study what weaknesses in policy or training may have allowed the situation to happen and how it went undiscovered by the agency for up to 2 years. The case was uncovered only after a postal inspector who was investigating an unrelated alleged assault on a mail carrier at the apartment building found out about it. The physical protection of the president and the vice president is crucial to the function of our democracy, said one former agent who spoke under the condition of anonymity. We have the first minority woman vice president. Both Biden and Harris are polarizing figures. Now we learn people who have access to the White House, Harris and Biden, can be duped. This is not good. Prosecutors have emphasized their investigation is in the early stages. Long story short, the Secret Service is full of many fine people. They have a fine history of bravery. They have done great work. They're also a government agency, which means they are prone to all the problems of any government agency, like bureaucracy, like getting top heavy, like losing their mission focus and having mission creep into other areas. And they're also full of people. And no matter who you are, people are full of human nature. Human nature is undefeated unless kept in very close check. You start throwing around money, luxury apartments, gifts, vehicles, somebody's going to break. They need to review their people. They need to find out why this happened, and they need to prevent it from happening ahead of time. But all those things are not just policy things. They better focus on the people. It's the people that protect the president, the vice president, and others in government. And it's people who are the most vulnerable to any system of security. More Hertel right after this. Welcome back to Hertel. She's back. Anytime we got to talk North Carolina politics, this is our go-to. She's the communications person for the John Locke Foundation in North Carolina. Brooke Medina, our good friend. Welcome back. Been a little bit.
Hey, I'm back.
Yeah.
So glad to be here.
So last time we talked to you, we had just had a Senate debate. We had the Carolina Liberty Conference, and Ted Budd no-showed. It was kind of the headline of that conference. We talked about it. Folks can go back and listen to that conversation right here on Hertel. Now, we said we would talk again when the Civitas polling came out. Well, here it be. We got the Civitas polling, and we've got some surprises here that actually made national news. I saw Real Clear picked it up and was running with it. Tell us what came out in the Civitas poll on the North Carolina Senate that's got everybody kind of eye-popped.
Yeah, so just to remind everyone, the previous poll that we did was back in January of GOP primary voters. And that was where Pat McCrory and Ted Budd were almost neck and neck. McCrory had a little bit of a lead. Now that lead is gone, and Ted Budd is decidedly the leading candidate at the moment. But also interestingly, so Budd, for example, is leading McCrory, Walker, Eastman, and then all of the other candidates. But there's still many undecided voters in this race, which is interesting because the primary is only about a month away. So this is an interesting poll, but I think it's telling us that a Trump endorsement actually does matter quite a bit. And so does a bunch of Club for Growth money, which Budd has both of those.
Yeah, they've been running ads nonstop. He has that endorsement. But the thing that's kind of befuddled us, and we talked about this last time, is that's all he's doing. He's not running anything vaguely resembling a traditional campaign. Maybe he's going to ramp it up in the next 30 days, but his strategy really seems to be show pictures of Trump with his arm around him and hope for the best. Have you seen anything differently? Because this is kind of a confounding strategy. It's working apparently, but this is not the traditional way to win politics in the state of North Carolina, is it?
It's not. Or it wasn't prior to Trump, I would say, but we polled these voters and over half of them said a Trump endorsement makes all the difference in the world for them in terms of who they're going to be voting for. A lot of them are still very loyal to the former president. And so this matters to them, and his endorsement matters to them. I'll also be interested in seeing how his endorsement plays with some of the congressional seats as well. But I think that this is one of those cases where we're seeing a North Carolina electorate on the GOP side that just they're still holding on to 2020 in a lot of ways, and maybe even 2016. And so Budd's strategy has been hang on to that endorsement and allow that to be the coattails on which he rides on in some respects.
Now, I'm really bad at math, but help me with this, because the pushback on that would be, okay, half of the voters say they want the Trump endorsed candidate. Fair enough. Bud's winning. He's up 10 or 11 points, statistically 11 points on this poll. But there's 39% undecided as well. That's incongruent to me, because half of them can't say, well, the endorsement matters, and then 39% of them are still undecided. What's going to decide this race in the next 36 days as we sit here looking at it? Because I don't think there's going to be something super dynamic. We pretty much know what we know about these candidates. Bud's kind of avoiding the spotlight in a lot of ways. is there anything that's really going to move the needle here on out, or is it just all Trump all the time from here until May?
Yeah, I mean, I think if we've learned anything from politics, even going back to the 2016 election, things can change in a very, very short matter of time. And we only need to look at Hillary Clinton's rise and then quick descent in 2016 for that. But the undecideds, when you narrow that field and you look more closely at the crosstabs of this poll, the undecideds narrow and go down to 29% once you eliminate some of these Senate candidates. Right now, we have a wide variety, an array of Republican Senate candidates. And so when you only narrow it to the four top contenders, which are Budd, Walker, McCrory, and Eastman, that number of undecideds drops decidedly. However, I think that we're going to see more Club for Growth ads. We're going to see more other PAC ads. McCrory is kind of turning up the heat as well. I wouldn't count on anything or take anything for granted if I were part of the Budd campaign or the McCrory campaign. And Walker continues to insist he is still in this race.
Real quick, because we don't just like to, cover the news. We want to explain it. You said something really important there, because it's something I learned when I started writing. Explain to folks when they see these poll numbers, there's the headline and everybody just sees the headline and runs with it. Just walk folks through for just a second, just so they understand how these things work, what a crosstab is. Because if you get these poll numbers, they tell you one thing, but statistics, the great Vince Scully always says, they're like a lamppost, everybody's illuminating, but a lot of times they're just holding a drunk up. These crosstabs are where the data is. So just explain to folks real quick, especially a really good, well done poll like the Civitas poll. That's why we use it. Those crosstabs give you a lot of additional information. They give you the context that the headline doesn't always. So just explain to folks real quick how that works and how they can check on those things. Because that's one of the things when I look at a poll is like, if they don't show me the crosstabs, if they don't give me that raw data to dig into, that's a poll that I'm going to look suspiciously at.
Yeah, and there are many mainstream polls out there that do not include the crosstabs. We make sure that we always include that in all of our Civitas polls. So if you go to johnlocke.org/polls, you're going to be able to find not only the top lines, which is like those initial numbers that are just the more basic ones. It's the question, and then it's the results from that question. But the crosstabs are kind of what their names suggests. It is the cross alignment of one question with another question. So you think about it kind of like as an XY axis, and it will explain to those who are reading it, okay, if a female in the 34 to 50-year-old demographic also said that she was going to vote for Budd, we can also look at what other questions she answered and said maybe that she was also planning on voting for Trump in 2024 if he was running. So it helps us define or narrow down what kind of respondent is actually answering these questions. And that's really helpful for political campaigns, but also people who are in public policy like us, where we're trying to better understand people. And we want to understand what drives them. And if you only ask someone one question, like, how are you doing today? They might automatically say fine, but you have to drill down into some deeper questions or other questions to properly contextualize. And that's what crosstabs do. It can be a little, it can be a little difficult to read them at times. So I suggest coffee beforehand, but they are very helpful means of information or data points that can give us a better understanding of really where the electorate is at.
Yeah, our friend Brooke Medina is back with us. She does communications for John Locke Foundation. This is the Civitas poll we're talking about, North Carolina Senate race. Okay, so the thing with this race, though, and you touched in it on the poll where they wrote it up at carolinajournal.com, the magic number on this race is actually not just the plurality of voters. The actual magic number is 30%, because in the state of North Carolina in this race, 30% is going to avoid a runoff. So obviously Budd wants to try to coast his way above it. McCrory, who's the nearest competitor, and Walker by extension, they want to drag him down below it. That's kind of the race within the race right now, isn't it?
Yeah, that's a good point. And that's an important point. And so if you are one of these, if you're a supporter or the actual candidate yourself, you need to keep these sorts of numbers in mind and again, not take anything for granted. The North Carolina electorate is quickly changing, but this is obviously a statewide race. It's not just a congressional district. And so McCrory, Budd, Walker, Eastman, they all have to be mindful of the dynamics within North Carolina and have to reach a wide array of voters all across the state. But also they have to be red media enough to appeal to the GOP primary voters, which are going to be the base of the base compared to the general election voters, where they're going to have to make a pivot to win a general election against the Democratic candidate, who in all likelihood will be Cherie Beasley.
All right. And for folks that's not familiar, just real quickly, break down for them, because all the focus has been on the Republican side. There is going to be a general election regardless of whether there's a runoff or not. Talk about Beasley for a minute, because she's not getting a lot of the attention because all the money and all the attention's on the GOP side. But North Carolina, it's trended redder, but it's still a competitive state. Tell us about the Democratic candidate for Senate that we're assuming is probably going to be the nominee.
Yeah, that's and this is the thing. There's a statewide race right now. We have 2 Republicans in Senate from North Carolina, but Cherie Beasley was a former Supreme Court justice on the state Supreme Court, and is certainly one that could be formidable against the Senate, the Republican candidate for Senate. And so I think that the Democrat strategy right now is just let the Republicans go at it. The Democrats are pretty good at coalescing around a candidate. And so they're saving their money, they're saving their war chest, and they're going to take it out as it gets a little bit closer to the election. But North Carolina, yes, it is trending a little bit more center right. But even so, our Council of State, these are our highest offices that are statewide, such as the governor, lieutenant governor, treasurer, attorney general. That's a mixture of Democrats and Republicans. And so that indicates, as well as just the North Carolina demographics changing and becoming more diverse, it indicates that no Republican candidate should probably spend all of their war chest just winning this primary race. They're going to have to ramp up their fundraising and pivot to a Democratic opponent very soon.
Yeah, talking to Brooke Medina, little North Carolina politics. Going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to put a bow on the polling for the Senate. We're also going to talk about some other North Carolinians that have been in the news, not for good reasons in the political side. We'll talk a little bit about that. More with Brooke Medina right after this. Welcome back to Heard Tell. Talking to our good friend Brooke Medina. She's got polling data. She's got opinions. She's got insight. We always enjoy having her on Heard Tell. Appreciate her time today. Okay. One of the things that's happening now is the Trump endorsement is obviously the whole story with Ted Budd. He's starting to get some other endorsements. Former President Trump was in Selma in the last few days. Mark Robinson came out and endorsed Budd. For people that aren't familiar with North Carolina politics, let them know who Mark Robinson is. That kind of surprised a few people. I do think that is a meaningful endorsement. Let folks know about Mark Robinson and why that kind of got folks' attention when he did that on stage with Trump standing there and endorsed Ted Budd.
Yeah, Mark Robinson is our lieutenant governor. He's the first Black lieutenant governor of the state. And he has a strong, solid base of Republican voters. And so he is actually the most popular and has the highest favorability ratings of Republican political figures right now across the state. That was another question that we asked in our polling, followed in short order by Senator Thom Tillis, which is kind of interesting because Thom Tillis a couple of years ago had the lowest approval ratings in all of the Senate. So that's a comeback story for you, but it's a little sidebar there. But Mark Robinson has been no stranger to political flack. He has said a number of bombastic things from church pulpits. He is often invited to those. And so there is some divisiveness, I would say, in the between the younger North Carolina Republicans and maybe those that are older or more socially conservative. So there's been some back and forth there, but even so, generally speaking, Lieutenant Governor Robinson has a lot of approval across the state. And so his endorsement of Budd means even more, because I would say even more North Carolinians are familiar with his name than they are with Ted Budd's.
Yeah, and it's a pretty open secret that he's going to be running for governor just as soon as we get this 2020 midterm cycle out of the way. Everybody's expecting that. We'll be talking about that down the road with you, I'm sure. Okay, a couple other things going on in the Old North State. A lot of attention to the youngest congressman of recent vintage, Madison Cawthorn, out in the western part of North Carolina, and none of it's good. You're based out of Raleigh, you do Civitas, you do John Locke, you guys are plugged in, you do a lot of policy stuff. The nonsense and the noise around this individual, this stuff seeps through, it distracts. But when you're trying to do policy stuff, is this one of those things where it keeps popping up and it's just starting to really, really annoy everybody on top of the nonsense stuff that he does?
Well, we certainly cover him in Carolina Journal, which is our news outlet. We have a print edition and an online edition. And so there are no shortage of stories related to Congressman Cawthorn there. But he's been under a lot of media scrutiny as well as public scrutiny, and his approval ratings are showing it. He is young, like you noted, but he's got a lot of responsibility. And so being young is really no excuse for, behaving in some of the ways that he has behaved as of late, talking about DC parties, wild drug-laden and sex-laden DC parties, as well as calling Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, a thug. But he is appealing to a certain base of his voters. But I don't know how that's going to play in the primaries. We have Chuck Edwards, who is one of his opponents, and the polling is showing from the Edwards campaign that he's actually gaining on Cawthorn. So we'll see how Cawthorn does. He's spent a term in DC, has not been very present for a lot of it, and that's one of the chief criticisms against him. And then he's been saying just some things that definitely make people kind of look askance at him and wonder where his maturity is.
There's a part of this because the antics and I find his behavior reprehensible on just a human level, let alone the politics of it. There's a big history in North Carolina. Richard Burr, who's the outgoing senator, of course, he has the stock scandal, which is what put him on the shelf. Richard Burr, part of the reason Tom Tillis's ratings have rebounded, most of the congressional delegation, both Democrat and Republican, there's a long tradition in the state of North Carolina, and you can speak to this. Your elected officials, when you go to that congressional office, when you go to that Senate office, you're going to get some kind of an answer. You're going to get some kind of personal service. That's why I think that's a big reason why Tom Tillis's stuff has rebounded. Richard Burr was well known for this. Like you got an answer when you went to his office. If you don't do that kind of work, that's not the stuff that gets on Twitter. That's not the stuff that gets on Facebook. It doesn't get talked about on CNN. But when people need something and they go to their congressman for it, and you're not present and you're not there, and you don't, I'm just going to say it, you don't have a competent staff to do those things, that's the stuff that really kills you when you go to the polling, because the people that are serious and show up to vote, those are things they still consider, even though it doesn't trend on Twitter, right?
Yeah, that's the human side of all of this, is treating your constituents like people and not just numbers that you need to maintain power. This isn't a reality TV show. These are real American lives. And when you exert some sort of level of authority over them, and you are indicating that you're incompetent to do that, word gets around, even if it isn't what catches fire on social media. A little story about Senator Burr is that just a personal story was that when my mom and dad were in a very, very life-threatening car wreck, I didn't have my passport. I had a passport, but it was expired. And Senator Burr's office helped me out so that I could get a passport expedited and fly out to the Dominican Republic that very next day. But that speaks to constituent services. You're there to help your constituents, not just go on podcasts and talk about wild DC drug-induced parties.
Yeah, and full bias and on the table for me. When I got my VA disability stuff, I went through Senator Burr's office. They kind of helped get that logjam fixed out. So I'll throw that one out there too. His staff were always very good with us and trying to do things like that. Okay, another guy from the western part of North Carolina, used to be a congressman, more famously known lately for being the chief of staff for the Trump administration in the latter days, very much a focus of the January 6th investigation stuff. Mark Meadows, but apart from the January 6th committee issues he's having, he's gotten himself some bad press back in North Carolina over, of all things, election fraud, and not the kind he accused everybody else of. You want to set this story up, because it's one of those. Look, I'm from West Virginia. We've done some hillbilly stuff. This is some hillbilly stuff right here that he tried to pull with this one.
Yeah, Dr. Andy Jackson, who's the head of our Civitas Center for Public Integrity, has written about this. So Mark Meadows, it appears there were questions surrounding whether or not he was actually legally allowed to vote in North Carolina. And that had to do with his voter registration status, but it's just, it's pretty rich given all of the election integrity claims that have come from the Trump administration. And then now Trump's own former chief of staff, Mark Meadows, is in hot water related to it. But it also exposes some of the North Carolina voter verification flaws. And so I would refer your listeners to johnlocke.org, where we talk about this and we examine whether or not former Congressman Meadows did violate the law. And if he did, what is the recourse? How do you even address things like this? And North Carolina's election laws are so regularly in the courts that it's hard to actually exert any sort of punitive measures against someone if they either mistakenly or purposefully violate our voter registration policies.
So just to, put you on the spot though, you don't fully believe Mark Meadows' account that he was registered to vote in a 16x32 double wide on the side of Black Mountain?
I don't. I feel like he or those who were advising him didn't understand how voter registration in North Carolina is supposed to work, which is a problem in and of itself, especially because the states administer the elections. He lives in this state. He is a representative of the state, or was. Yeah. So I think that I don't think that was actually his address. I can't imagine him hosting little fundraisers there.
Nothing wrong with a double wide. I lived in one till I was 11, 12 years old, and we moved back up yonder. So from the double wide I came, I will happily go back to. There's nothing wrong with that. Brooke, Medina, one last thing, just to kind of put a bow on this conversation, North Carolina politics. We saw the polling data. They did the favorability data. Is there any other issue? I know Trump is the elephant in the room on this election, but this is really going to be an economic election. Is there anything you're covering, whether it's the polling, the data, the stuff you're doing with Carolina Journal, y'all just talking to policymakers around Raleigh for the state? This is the economy, isn't it?
Well, it is going to be in the general election. I mean, inflation is now even at the next 40-year high. So it's at 8.5%. It rose in March. So that is certainly going to be a central focus, as it should be, for this next election. But one thing we asked the voters in this past poll was, what are some of the other issues that matter to you? And still among GOP primary voters in North Carolina, it's immigration, illegal immigration. So take that for what it's worth, but that is an issue that North Carolina GOP primary voters care about. We don't deal with that federal issues like that at John Locke Foundation. We're far more concerned with state level policies. That's where we can exert some research clout. And so we're specifically focused on advancing school choice, making sure regardless of where you're from, that you have access to a really good education. We're also focused on, of course, voter reforms so that we can have voters voting in the district that they actually live in, not just like a double wide that they say they live in that's far from their home. And then we're also focused on energy policies. We're moving more into that. We know the rising cost of energy is of top concern to North Carolinians as well. And so if you go to johnlocke.org, you're going to find lots of content related to these issues, as well as a number of other ones all across the state. We want to make sure that we're continuing to advance freedom, but especially on the economic, education, and elections fronts.
The North Carolina primary that we're talking about will be held in May. Our friend Brooke Medina does a great job covering these things. We will continue to have you back on, but until we see you again here in a few weeks, let folks know where they can follow you. You already mentioned all the John Locke stuff, but can they follow you and your social media so they can keep track of Brooke Medina when she's not off on cruises and gallivanting around LA and all the other fun stuff you were doing before election season kicks in and you got to work for a living?
Yeah. I took a little siesta before election season. Now I'm ready and rearing to go. But you can follow me on Twitter at Brooke_Medina_ or my Instagram, Brooke Medina Writes. And so would love to connect with you all there. And thank you for listening.
Yeah, you do great work. We appreciate you so much. Can't wait to talk to you again, my friend Brooke Medina. Thank you so much for the time, man.
Thank you.
Welcome back to Heard Tell. I'm Andrew Donaldson. Let's touch in on a story we have covered a couple of times on the program. Mark Meadows, former congressman. We mentioned it with today's guest, Brooke Medina. Well, come to find out after we finished our chat with Brooke Medina, something interesting happened about Mr. Mark Meadows. Here we go. Former chief of staff removed from the North Carolina voter rolls amid fraud investigation. On April 11th, Macon County officials, quote, direct quote here, administratively removed the voter registration of Mark Meadows after documentation indicated he lived in Virginia and last voted in the 2021 election there, meaning in Virginia. North Carolina State Board of Elections spokesperson Patrick Gannon said in a statement, this is from the Washington Post, a representative for Meadows declined to comment on Wednesday. State investigators in North Carolina, as we detailed with our friend Brooke shortly ago, launched a probe into Meadows' voter registration last month after news organizations reported he had registered to vote in 2020 using the address of a mobile home in Scaly Mountain, North Carolina. The former owner of the mobile home claimed Meadows never stayed there, prompting the state attorney general to request an investigation. A couple layers here. One is he's a former congressman of that area. Number two is he was the chief of staff for Trump and was heavily involved in all the January 6th stuff. He was one of the guys that was pushing that there's massive election fraud. Turns out he knew exactly what he was talking about because he'd be doing it. His wife's also involved. No word yet whether she has also been removed, but clearly there was fraud here. One has to wonder if he was a normal person, would he be having a stiffer penalty, as we have seen in places like Texas and elsewhere, people doing voter fraud. I think he got off light. I think he's a hypocrite, and I'm very glad he's no longer in elected office. I don't care who you are. Don't cheat. If you're going to cheat, keep it on the down low. Don't accuse everybody else of cheating when you know good and well you're the one that's been cheating all along. So, Mark Meadows, enjoy what you get out of this. I have suspicions this isn't the last we've heard of your wrongdoing as you continue to be investigated. May you never hold elected office again. You have no character, you are unfit for office, and you're a cheater. End of story. More Heard Tell right after this. Heard Tell Show. You know we like to usually end on a good note, positive note, something happy. Let's go over to England. This is a cool little story. A charity for ex-prisoners say just 16% of those they support end up reoffending. Key for Life has helped more than 500 prisoners and young men at risk of committing crimes find jobs. Eva Hamilton, founder of the charity, said many of them they see overcome huge traumas. One ex-offender helped the program said, I can't even see myself going back to prison. Based in Somerset, the charity actively encourages employers to hire ex-offenders and has now been running for over a decade, reading from the BBC here. It offers skills training and emotional support for those trying to rebuild their lives after a prison term. Key for Life says that 2/3 of its users go on to find work and find a job, helps reduce the chance of them reoffending by over a third. Ms. Hamilton set up the charity with the aim of breaking the cycle of crime. She said it's hard enough to get a job and even more difficult for people that really want to turn their lives around and to be given another chance. It just seems so many people feeling they've got no options in life. They turn to bad things. One of the ways the charity offers support is by hiring mentors who are also ex-offenders to teach job and life skills. Those men get to experience music, football. Remember, we're talking about England here, so they're talking about soccer, not football. A little note there. Equine therapy, which works, by the way, NLP, that's neuro-linguistic programming, and emotional release sessions. Ben Williams, 24, was just 17 when he was jailed for stabbing someone in retaliation after his friend was killed. He was sentenced to 12 years in prison and served 6 with his good behavior got out. He said, jail wasn't very easy for me at the start. It became quite a lot easier to deal with at the end. I think that forced me to grow up quite a lot. I haven't felt like this in a long time, and I feel like this is my opportunity to better myself. And I probably won't get another opportunity like this if I mess it up. So I don't see myself ever going back to prison. The charity holds workshops with various employers who then interview the young men in full knowledge that they hold a criminal record. James Lovell from Wessex Water attended one of the workshops. He said, I think it's great to support this. What I can see here today is a number of young men that have had some difficult circumstances and some difficult times in their lives. What I see now is that they are putting everything that they possibly can into improving the outlook of those lives. Mr. Williams was offered a short work placement in Wessex Water after the session. He said, I never thought I'd be in a situation like this. A lot of people wouldn't look at us twice in a job, and I've had that most of my life. So it's time to make something of myself and be like, I told you so. And good luck to them. Good little charity. Always good to see people. We don't ever want to give up on people here on Heard Tell. If they want to take a shot at turning their life around, we should be there with a hand up to help them do so. We always want people, once they've paid their debt to society, to come back and become productive members of that society. It's good for all of us. That'll do it for Heard Tell. Hope you are subscribed. If you're not, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Make sure you hit the like button too. And if you really want to do us a favor, it only costs you a couple extra clicks. Leave a comment. I love those. We always read them. We've even gotten show ideas from them. You got a question, you got a topic you want us to cover, let us know about that. You want to be a little more direct, heardtellshow@gmail.com. Send us an email. Might even read it on the air. Might even invite you on to talk about it. We just did that with somebody that had something he wanted to say about our program for a future program. At Heard Tell on the Twitter, my hashtag 4 for the fire. Of course, the hashtag of our guests, always on the lower third graphics on the YouTube. Make sure you're supporting them. So wherever you are, across the street or around the world, until we talk to you again tomorrow on Heard Tell or on the Good Talks podcast playlist, if you just want to listen to the interviews, or on the Twice on Sunday show, or whatever of the Heard Tell products you are getting ready to consume, you're going to get the noise of the news cycle turned down, and we will see you again. We hope you are well. We hope you are well fed. We'll talk to you tomorrow on Heard Tell.
All the music on Heard Tell is provided under a Creative Content license from monstercat.com.